you have mentioned for me to make a video about working with a living room with a corner fireplace. So in this video, we are going to talk about how to figure out a furniture layout if our living room has a corner fireplace. And there are a number of neat things actually to think about when we do have a corner fireplace in a living room. One of them is that right away it is kind of adding variety. So instead of having our fireplace centered on the wall, in the corner, it kind of changes things up a bit. And another thing that's kind of nice is that it adds something special to the corner of a room, because sometimes we don't always know what to do with a corner. So in a way, it kind of solves that for us. It may even help to emphasize the length of a room if our eyes are drawn all the way over to the corner of that room. And if we have a corner fireplace, we can still create a really nice balanced layout to the room. In fact, I was looking at my living room and I have a fireplace centered on a wall, but I thought if I had it on the corner, well, I would still set up my furniture arrangement in the same way. So let me take you through some steps that you can think about to make it easier to figure all of this out. So when we are planning out our living room with the corner fireplace, we want to consider the entire room and take notice that we are going to have at least two focal areas in the room. Our first focal area is that corner fireplace where it really does grab our attention. It's a very important area and we want to make sure that we have a nice view of that area. The other focal area that we need to have in our room is what we could call our conversation area, where our sofa or sectional would be and any other coordinating furniture as part of that grouping. And that is going to help to balance out the room, because right away, when we look at a room that is empty and all we see is a corner fireplace, we need to create some balance. There's a lot of visual weight over by the fireplace. So what we need to do is create some balance in the room and create a nice seating area so that the room looks and feels a little bit more balanced overall. So one of the first things that we want to do is take a look at the entire room. And this process that I'm going to take you through can be used with any type of room, whether you have a corner fireplace or not. To take you through this process, let's take a look at a stock image photo of a living room with a corner fireplace. And here is a floor plan view of that living room. And I'm going to need to fill in some information and guessing that there would be a front door at the bottom left corner, and maybe there's an opening to the right to go into the kitchen area. But we can get a good sense of this room, noticing that there's a front door, a window, then the corner fireplace, then there is a stairway, and then the opening to the kitchen. So that's always one of the first things to do, is just to kind of take a look at your room and see what you're working with. Then we need to take some time to see where we can really place some furniture. So we need to look at a couple of different things. So what we need to figure out in this room is where we need to set aside space, open areas for us to be able to move around that room and to access different areas, as well as places where we need to set aside space around certain features. Then we also need to make sure that we create open areas, or we could call them sightlines, so that we can visually see different areas of the room. One of the first things that I like to do is figure out where we need pathways. So pathways to move around the room and move to access other areas. So we will notice in this room that we need to have a pathway to access the stairway at the far end of the room, to access the front door, and also to access the opening to the kitchen. And when we're taking a look at this, we will notice that actually the pathway to get over to the stairway could be on the right side of the room or either on the left side of the room. our goal when we're setting up pathways is making sure that there's a nice flow to enter a room and to access other areas. Then when we're talking about clearances, one thing we need to keep in mind is that a door has to be able to open very easily. So it's really important for us to leave space around the door where we wouldn't place anything in that area. And for a fireplace, I recommend leaving 36 inches or 91.44 centimeters out from the front of the fireplace before you place anything else like a piece of furniture. And then we also want to make sure we have clearance for our sightlines. So that means that we can easily see views of different features in a room. One of the important features of our room is the corner fireplace. So we want to make sure that we are not blocking that view. In this room example, we can see that there is a sofa right up next to the fireplace where it is blocking the view. Plus, it's too close to the fireplace. It's not outside that clearance of 36 inches. So just keep that in mind when you're setting up your room. Make sure that you can easily see really important features in the room. So after we have figured out where we need to leave space for pathways and clearances and making sure that there's a nice flow to the room, this is where we want to figure out what is left over for us to place furniture. In our stock image example, we'll notice now that we almost have kind of a rectangular shape left over where we can place a conversation area, the seating area for this room. And we notice that we could have pathways on either side. And we could place that rectangle, or we can almost think of it as an area rug on the right side of the room or the left side of the room. Then when we know the area that we have to work with, the first thing I always try to do is place the sofa first, because that's one of the larger pieces that we'll have in that conversation area or the sectional. And think about the views. So when you are sitting on that sofa or that sectional, what would you like to be looking at? And keep in mind that your main view isn't the only view. So when you are placing your sofa in this room with a corner fireplace, you'll still be able to enjoy the view of the fireplace and anything else that you want to focus on in the room. So here are two layouts that I created for this room. And I'd love to find out from you which layout you think works better for this space, either option A or option B. So please share your choice in the comments. And this stock image of another living room with the furniture setup is actually very similar to the one that we use for the space planning exercise. And we'll notice that they have a conversation area, and they set aside areas for movement and pathways to get to the other side of the room, and also that there's a nice view, unobstructed view of the fireplace. And here is another room that has a corner fireplace. They have an area set up as a main conversation area where the sofa is, and they also have some accent chairs. And at the same time, they're able to enjoy the view of the fireplace. In that room that we just worked on, we had room for one main conversation area. But what happens if you have a larger room with a corner fireplace where you may have room for even two different zones or areas in a room, such as in this example? When we take a look at this room and the floor plan view of this room, we could create maybe a little seating area right near the fireplace, and then also a larger conversation area down near the front door of the room. Or we could reverse that and have our conversation area closer to the fireplace and then another little area down near the window. And if you notice, most of these layouts that I am providing for these examples are square with the room. They're not necessarily set up diagonally to parallel the diagonal angle of the fireplace. Because when we are thinking about placing furniture in a diagonal way, there are a couple things to think about. One of the first things is that placing furniture in a diagonal sort of fashion may take up more space than it would if we place furniture parallel or perpendicular to 90-degree walls of a room. Plus, it kind of wastes a lot of space. It may look a little awkward, and we may not know what to do with the rest of the space. And being able to place the furniture parallel or diagonally with the fireplace, we may need to have a very large room to be able to create a successful layout. So what we want to keep in mind is we can certainly try to see if we can place things diagonally and parallel to a diagonal corner fireplace. But we want to make sure that we have room to do that. Another thing that can happen when we place our furniture square to the walls is that it creates some stability. Because if we think about the corner fireplace, that is kind of creating some variety and some movement to the room and breaking up those 90-degree angles. So when we place our furniture in a more square type of arrangement, it helps to add some stability to the room. Plus, on top of it, it relates back to the room maybe just a bit more because it's almost repeating the shape of that space. And in fact, we can kind of be inspired by the diagonal nature of the corner fireplace by placing some pieces of furniture in our rooms at an angle. So that could be an accent chair in relationship to a sofa or sectional that's placed at an angle, and it helps to kind of break things up and add variety. So if you have a living room with a corner fireplace, it doesn't have to be any more challenging to setting it up. Just make sure that you consider the entire room. Set aside room for pathways and clearances, and then what you have left over to create a nice seating area. So I'd love to find out from you if you have a fireplace centered on a wall in your living room, and if it were to change all of a sudden to be in the corner, would you keep your furniture arrangement the same, or would you need to change something? So please share that in the comments. Thanks so much for watching, and I look forward to seeing you next time when we discover more neat things about interior design. Take care.